The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Along the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter said to him in reply, "You are the Christ." Then he warned them not to tell anyone about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed and rise 3 days later. He spoke this openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. At this, he turned around and, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." He summoned the crowd with the disciples and said to them, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it." The Gospel of the Lord.
I had a good friend, priest, a few years younger than I am. He was in the seminary a few years behind me, so we really didn't study together. But after he was ordained, he was sent to the same school where I was the principal and he was a teacher, so we got to know each other really well. And then I was assigned to Japan, and a few years later he was assigned to Japan. So after his language studies, we were assigned together. I was pastor and he was assistant pastor in the same parish, and we knew each other really, really well. After a while, he decided to leave the order that I belonged to. He joined the Diocese of Lansing, where he was from, and he worked in a parish there. And when I came back from Japan, he and I got to see each other every so often. We'd go out to dinner, and usually to a Japanese restaurant, whatever. So a few years ago, 6 years ago, actually probably 7 years ago, he got sick. And like I said, he was a few years younger than I was. And the doctors couldn't find out what was wrong. And they tried a bunch of different things. Anyways, I would be in contact with him through social media or whatever. One day I went to visit him. He was in the hospital, and he had sepsis, which is, as you probably know, not a good thing. And he was going through dialysis, and so I sat there while he went through dialysis, and it was a couple of hours, and we just talked about so many things. And after I left, I thought to myself, what else can I do for him? You know, when someone that you care about deeply is suffering, you want to do as much as you can. You know, those of you who are parents and have children and you see them suffering, whether it's physical suffering or psychological, emotional suffering, whatever it may be, you want to do something for them. And on the other side, those of us who have parents who are elderly, or my parents were elderly, and not well, you want to do as much as you can for him. I always used to think, you know, I can pray for him, but sometimes, and not that prayer is wrong, sometimes that's not enough. And in my friend's case, well, it's not a whole lot I could have done except to continue to visit him or contact him, you know, send him texts or telephone messages or whatever, to let him know that, you know, that I was still around, that I was with him. But I'm sure you've all often felt that kind of frustration and not knowing how to help people when you want to. Time and time again in our country, when we have these mass shootings, especially in schools, and the easiest comment is, well, you're in my thoughts and prayers. And we see many times comments back saying, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. I'm not planning on getting in any political discussion of any kind here, but there are times when thoughts and prayers are not enough. And St. James tells us in today's second reading, and he's been saying the same thing the past couple of weeks. Words are not enough. If your faith doesn't have action, if you don't put it into practice, then it's useless, thoroughly useless. Coming to church, saying the rosary, saying your prayers, all those things are good. That's not enough. So many times, and I'm here often recently on Saturdays, and so I'm in the confessional, I wish somebody would come in and say, Father, I didn't do this. It's always, I did this bad thing, which isn't that bad. Or I said this bad word. Well, we all say bad words occasionally. Or I had this bad, awful thought. But nobody, or rarely, does anybody come in and say, Father, I didn't help the person down the street that needed my help. I didn't bake a cake. I didn't make a casserole. I didn't cut their grass. I didn't shovel their snow when I know that they needed it or they would have appreciated it. There are so many things that we can do for others, that God calls us to do for others. And if we don't do them, if we don't go out of our way to look for ways of helping others, then our faith, my friends, is useless. It's not enough. St. James is very, very clear about this. And Jesus, in today's gospel, when he talks about his suffering, how he has to suffer, and Peter says, no. We don't want to suffer. We don't want those around us to suffer. But suffering is, unfortunately, a part of life. How we react to that suffering, to our own suffering, and to the suffering of others is something different. And reacting to their suffering, whatever kind of suffering they're going through, not just with words, but with actions, with going out of your way to help them in some way or another. That's what makes our faith useful. That's what makes our faith alive.